Hello everyone, welcome to our actual first video on the actual concept of scripting. The first video was more of an introduction to a Roblox studio, just to get you familiar with the tools and the basics of the engine. So now let's just dive right into it. So the first thing you want to do is head over to your server script service and click on the plus arrow. Here you can insert different kind of objects within the service, but for now let's just enter a normal script. In Roblox, there are 3 scripts that you use when creating experiences. The first one is just your normal script as we inserted in their server script service, and this one is more associated with server-side coding. We will get to that later as we continue to explore. The next script you need to know is a local script, and local scripts are scripts run through the clients. What clients are basically your players. Players are your clients. Clients connect to the server. So there's 2 things you need to know: the server and the client. The server is basically all the stuff that goes on connected to Roblox itself, and the clients are things associated with the player. So the player connects to the server. And the final script that Roblox has are module scripts, and basically in simplest form they're scripts that can be accessed by other scripts, but they can become much more complicated than that. So now that we got our script open, let's just talk about what we're looking at here. Here we can see the page where we'll be typing out all of our different lines of code, and we can also delete this print hello world here. You may see that mine may look a little bit different than yours if you haven't used Roblox 3 before. If you want to change it into dark mode, just go to File, Studio Settings, and then under Studio, scroll down until you see, we're here. Under General, go to Theme, and they can change it to dark or lighter default, which is the same thing. I like it dark because it's a little easier on the eyes, I feel like. Now, a window that you want to have open, as I mentioned before, is your output window. So you want to go to your View tab, go to the output, click and open it. Yours might appear somewhere else, but you can always just click the window and drag it. You can see this little grid here where you can place it in different locations, but I'm just going to set mine to the bottom. You can also grab the top and move it to see it, more or less of it. Let's now dive into the concept of variables and referencing. Now, what a variable is, it's kind of like something that you defined in substitution for. If you think of math, you can set the letter x to any kind of number and put it into an equation. Let's just take a look at this example I have here. We can see here in a very childlike equation that we have a variable. Now, in most math classes, you would take the time and solve it and find out that x is equal to 3. But in programming, we set these variables to a value. We're not solving for a value, we make the value. So what we do in programming is that we set x equal to 3. Now we could write 2 plus 3 equals 5, but when we get into developing many lines of code and they become very lengthy projects, we want to keep it in the simplest form so we can have a bunch of numbers equal to a single letter. But in this case, we want to write 2 plus x equals 5, as if we defined x equals 3 previously. So if we head back over to our studio, we can do the same and define x as 3. Now what we have just created is a global scope, a global variable. Global variables are variables that can be accessed throughout the entire script. Now normally we don't write global variables because they're quite inefficient and they can cause slower speeds, as if we were to write local. Now local is a keyword that we use to define variables. So we would write local x, and this is going to be equal to 3. Now these two do mean the same thing, but local is much more efficient. Now variables do not have to be just numbers alone. They can be any kind of Roblox data type. So let me just see here. Variables can be one of the 8 different data types that Roblox has. They can be Boolean values, numbers, strings, which is like text. Boolean values are true and false. Anything like that can be referenced as a variable. We can also set variable values to things within our Explorer. Like if we wanted to reference our base plate, we can create a variable that references our base plate. Now, let's just take a look at this example for a minute and kind of go over what is happening when we are referencing. So, for this example, we're using the Earth. The Earth is the thing that contains everything, right? And within the Earth, we have different number of continents. And in those continents, we have different countries. So we can see our steps of how we reference. We start with the Earth, go to the continents, and then go to the country. And I misspelled country, I just realized. Now, when addressing these different levels, we use the terms parent and child. Now, the parent contains the children. The children are under the parent. So we can see Earth is the parent of the continent. The continent is within the Earth. And within the continent is the country. And it's really bugging me that I misspelled that, but it's okay. Now, the continent's in the middle, right? So it's the parent of the country, but it's also the child of the Earth. And you might think that the Earth would be the parent of the country, but that's not the sequence that it follows. It goes Earth, continent, country. So if we go back to Roblox Studio, if we want to reference our base plate, we can see under the tab here all the items inside the workspace, and in the workspace is our base plate. So it goes workspace, base plate. Now before, there was a different way of defining your workspace, but historically what you want to do is that you realize the game contains everything. The game contains all of these services, so you would normally write game, and then to go down or up in referencing something, you would hit period, and you go workspace. So now we have defined our workspace, and you also need to have a name for your variable. So our variable is going to be called baseplate. So right now, baseplate is actually equal to our workspace. And then to go down further within the workspace, so we find our workspace, then we have to go into our workspace to get our baseplate. And now when we type baseplate, we can see and come up here. So now we have our baseplate defined and referenced to. Now, since workspace is a little bit different, we can always just go workspace, workspace.baseplate. I'm not sure why they changed that, but I don't really know. But for other services, like if you wanted to reference the players, you can call your baseplate whatever in your variable. It doesn't have to be baseplate. You can call it like apples or something. But if I wanted to define my my players as apples, we go game dot players. But when defining services, you normally don't use the period here. What you want to do is use the you will want to use the get service function. And what this does, you start with your game, and the game is going to get the service that you request, and it takes in a string value. As you can see here, the class name is going to be a string. So you type your two quotation marks, and you type in the service that you want to get. So I just want to change this to workspace. Oh, when naming certain variables, there are some keywords that you're not allowed to use. Like for example, workspace, right? Because workspace is a keyword set by Roblox. And if I wanted, like, for example, local is a keyword. And if I want to create a variable called local, I cannot type local because you can see it writes it twice. Yeah, I would have to change a capital casing of it, or the entire word itself. So I'm just gonna call this capital workspace. Oh, and I realized it's the same thing. Okay, well, I'm just gonna call it just WS for short. Now, I also want to mention about how scripts operate. So the way scripts operate is kind of like reading a book. I mean, it's pretty easy to pick up on, but it might not be obvious for some. But the way scripts run is they run left to right and up to down. So the order you put and define certain variables and other things is important because it reads left to right, up and down. So I just want to talk about print for a moment. Print is a function that allows, when certain parameters are passed, it'll print out in your output. This is why the output is important, because it helps. Print is not normally useful in anything else other than like debugging and checking certain areas of your code, seeing if it's being run through. So we can pass strings, numbers. See, we put the number 2, and if we go to the test and click this arrow here and hit run, the game is going to run, and we can see in our output the number 2 has been printed. And go to this orange square to stop it. Now, I just want to delete this. If we create a variable called x, and we set this equal to 3, we can either print 3, and we'll see 3 come out the output as we did with 2, or we can print x, and we'll get the same result, 3. This is because x and 3 are the same thing, but in terms of order, if we put print first, we can see there's already an error. The reason why this is because Roblox reads it top, down, left, and right. So this is going to be read first, and it's going to try to print x, but x has not been defined yet. X has been defined under here. So we just run it just to show you. The value is nil, and nil means nothing. It means something that's non-existent. It's not 0, because 0 is a number. It's nil means nothing. So in regards with scopes, which is kind of what we talked about with the Earth and the continents and that, scopes can be applied within scripts as well. As before, you can see that when I did x equals 3, I said this was a global scope, meaning everything within the script has access to this, if it was defined before making a reference to it. If I did print x, it will still result in the same issue, as we can see here. No. If nothing is embedded within certain blocks of code, which are referenced as controlled structures, and these controlled structures are blocks of code. This is what you normally see. So controlled structures can be anything from like functions, loops, if statements, things like that. So I'm just going to write out some blocks of code just to give you a visualization. So you don't have to worry about what any of this means, but we will go over it. So okay, what we see here is that within this while, this is called a while loop, by the way, but we'll learn about it. But in this while loop, you can kind of see this like gray arrow here representing a block of code, right? And if I extend this, you can see that everything between this first statement and this last statement, this is one controlled structure. And anything in between this if statement, you see this line here, anything between here is another controlled structure or a block of code. Now, in terms of parent and child, this loop here is the parent of this if statement, and the if statement is the child of the while loop. Now, if we wanted to see if a certain variable is accessible to within these blocks of code, we could just create one. Now, since it's written outside of these blocks of code, it can be accessed within the while loop and within the if statement. So we go, if just for example, if we print x, and we need a wait here, but we'll learn about that later. Now, if I were just hit run, it will continuously print hello, and you can see it's rapidly printing hello. And if I were to print it outside, it will also print hello. And I know it's kind of hard to understand what is happening here because we haven't gone over this yet, but basically, since x is outside the blocks of code, it can be accessed with anything with inside. But if we defined x within this if statement, you can see already that there's an arrow with trying to print x. That's because x is outside of this if. X has been defined as a local scope, and this local scope is only local to this block of code. It's not a global, meaning it can be accessed everywhere. It's a local, and it's only local to the certain area that you write it in. If you write it up here, it's local to the script, it's local to everything. But if you write it within this if statement, the variable is only local to this if statement. If we write it up here, then you'll see that it'll work because the variable has been defined as something that is local to this loop. But if we were to print x out here, you see there's an arrow. That's because x has only been defined locally to this loop. And one last thing I want to mention is when writing out certain variables, there's kind of a standard that, this just kind of like what's been widely practiced as the style that you write out your variables. So when defining something with two words, like for example, apples and oranges, there's something wrong with writing this, but most programmers would just write apples and oranges. This is called camel casing. And you can see there's no error when I define a variable like this. This is because by default, if I don't set it equal to anything, it by default it'll set it to nil. I can write nil and just leave it as is, and it'll set it to nil. But in regards with the naming, if I were to name like a service or something, most people just write abbreviated version of it, or you can just write replicated storage. Awesome. And then this is how you normally practice defining certain variables. So this will pretty much wrap it up for today. Hopefully this will help you get a better approach into your first steps with Roblox scripting, and hopefully you learn something and just continue to practice with the print and other things. And one last thing I want to mention is some valuable resources. Be sure to check out the Creator Hub, where there's lots of different references and resources you can look into, and lots of tutorials where it'll help you walk through the beginner steps to scripting. Another useful resource is the developer forum. Here there's a lot of community tutorials and lots of people with errors and developers trying to help each other, and this is a great area to learn from us as well. And as always, if you have any questions, please just let me know in the comments and I'll try to address with them. Thank you for watching.